Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining me from. I am so very pleased that you have chosen to join us on this wonderful topic of Aquaculture 101, something that's very near and dear to my heart, but also something that in almost every single one of our regular every other Thursday episodes that we come to you here, we get lots of questions about aquaculture, and it's the world's fastest growing food system. It is relatively new to the world. It is somewhat controversial, but also so laden with opportunity. And so, well, it's something that needs to be discussed. And I'm so thrilled that you've chosen to join us here today to do just that. A little bit of housekeeping first and foremost. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, you know what, I'm going to mute my computer just because I forgot to do that. Over on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the questions box over there. So please do drop in your questions, any questions that you see already in there that are particularly relevant to you. Wow, I just realized something. I blocked in my colleague who is trying to leave right now. I blocked her in with a trailer. I'm going to show you a video at some point, and I am going to then run outside and take care of that. So, Patrick, a little change of plans. Patrick is my wonderful near and dear colleague at Rouxbe, who is behind the scenes here today. And he is always so gracious and wonderful about going with the punches. And hold on one second. Hey, Katie, I have blocked your car in with a trailer.
I got it away.
You got it away?
I'm strong.
Katie, my business partner, is amazing. Okay, sorry for that interlude here. You are joining me here in my home kitchen, which is also a daycare for my 11-month-old, etc. So forgive me for actually living a real life. It's what it is. Anyway, I appreciate all of you and your patience. So if you like any of the particular questions that are already over in the gray box over there, just click that heart icon to vote them up to the top. Now, I've read through a number of the questions already, and there's some really good ones coming in. Many of the questions that have come in, though, I will address at some point during the conversation here today. So check those out. And also, because at the end of the day, what is aquaculture? Well, it's the production of food, right? I mean, hey, and what is food? Food is love. Food is care. Food is grace itself. But it's also delicious, and we don't want to lose track of that. So I do have a couple of recipes for you that we will be bringing you, and a video of me cooking outside a few days ago, just to, well, anchor us at the table. And as I said, food is love, food is grace, food is virtue, and so I just want to thank you for your interest in food, because when we feed people, it is an act of love, and the world needs far more of that. And any of you who have ever joined me here before know that I like to talk about something that I am grateful for before we start off, because the very best and most foundational ingredient in any good cooking is gratitude for the food that we are eating, for the people who bring it to us, and for those who we are able to feed. So something I'm grateful for today is a healthy boy. Last night, my son had a little stomach issue, my 11-month-old, and I just stayed up with him the entire night. And it was really special, but also heartbreaking. And then this morning, when he turned a corner very quickly and just started, and wants to play with everything, it just reminds you of how robust and resilient life is. And I give thanks for that today. And for you and your resilience, because we've all just made it through a hell of a period, right? And resilience is how we did it. So to all of you, I'm grateful for who you are, for how you live your lives, and for joining me here today. All right. So now that all that gushy stuff is out of the way, here we go. My name is Barton Seaver. I am a chef, author, proud resident of Freeport, Maine, up here on the coast where aquaculture is particularly relevant. My career in restaurants, well, I spanned my restaurants and then moved away to become an explorer for the National Geographic Society when I got very interested in sustainable marine food systems. That is a very sexy job, if you can imagine it. My job description was go somewhere, do something, and then tell somebody about it, all under the little golden rectangular halo of National Geographic. And I learned a whole lot about people, about systems, about cultures, about economies, as well as, of course, about the environment. So when we talk about sustainable seafood, to me, what that means is the endurance of thriving human communities who are dependent upon resilient marine ecosystems. That is what sustainability means to me, and that is the tact or sort of the angle with which I will approach aquaculture here today. I also got very interested in public health as the measure of what is a thriving, enduring human being, right? Well, public health is how we talk about that and measure it. And so my focus has really been on that human aspect for many years, and I will interlace that here. But first off, let's just talk about the fact that, well, aquaculture, what is it? Well, I'll get into this a little bit more later on, but it is the farming of finfish and of shellfish for the purposes either of, well, for many economic purposes, but mostly for the feeding of people. Where does it happen? It happens all over the world. How old is it? Not very old at all. It's a very new industry, and I'll get into that a little bit of history later. But in my history with aquaculture, quite frankly, I was a card-carrying, banner-waving, farmed and dangerous advocate. I thought that farmed seafood, with few exceptions, was really just a bad idea. And at the outset of farming the seafood industry, you know what? There were a lot of mistakes made, and we'll go through that. And there still are a lot of mistakes being made. However, my mind was changed as I opened myself up to really taking a very measured approach, to really looking at things from multiple angles. And when we do so, we begin to see that aquaculture, from my opinion, is a vital, necessary function and really opportunity within modern food systems, one that is really very exciting, one that still has a very long way to go, a lot of missteps to still account for. And so I am not presenting this to you today as absent of controversy or somehow this crystal clear context in which something is good or bad. That doesn't exist in the world. What I'm presenting to you today is a measured approach to just looking at what aquaculture is. And this is just a 101. We're not going to dive so deep that I'll wonk you out on science or policy. We can certainly do that. But this is just a broad level, top line approach to just, hey, how to think about it and how for you to make up your own mind. I'm not giving you anything more than my opinion and a bunch of facts, but this is food. It's the most personal thing that we interact with in our natural environments. It is such an intimate part of our personal cultures, our family's cultures. So please to understand that I'm presenting to you today with respect. So my mission around seafood, sustainable seafood, is actually to get more people across all demographics eating more seafood, because I believe that seafood as an animal protein is an essential part of thriving humans. Now, I know that the Rouxbe community, we have a lot of vegans, we have a lot of whole food, plant-based diet cooks and enthusiasts, and all dietary choices are correct for you, whatever it is that you decide. So again, I am not necessarily advocating for a position so much as I am espousing the facts around things and presenting context. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit about my journey here. And Patrick, if you could please go to that first slide, a picture of a trip that I took to an area of the world that is not known for seafood, folks. Not at all. It is up in the mountains of Switzerland. And remember, when I took this trip, I was a card-carrying, farmed and dangerous guy. I was just not a fan of farmed seafood. And here, though, was a project that was really interesting. There was a tunnel, and allow me just to tell you a Nat Geo story here. There was a tunnel being bored through the mountains behind what you're seeing here. I mean, this was a Regal ad, a Regal reverberating throughout the hills in the subalpine, alpine region. I mean, it was just incredibly gorgeous. And this tunnel was being bored through some mountains in order to create interstate, intercanton travel and trade. And while doing this, they tapped into a geothermally heated spring. So there was all this, what could be considered hot for that environment, water, right? Because if it's coming out of the mountain warm, it's not what the ecosystem normally gets. So there had to be some mitigation, right? You can't just put hot water into cool streams and expect everything to be okay. So there's options, one of which is just to naturally cool the water through energy intensive means or very land use intensive means. The other one, there was this guy, this engineer on the project who looked at this and said, hot water, in the Swiss Alps, you know what we need? We need bananas. What did he do? So he took this greenhouse that you see here, and the next slide, well, he grew bananas because Switzerland, Interlaken, up there in the hills, right? The sound of music and bananas. There you go. So what else did he have? Because he had all this hot water left over. Well, I've got bananas. What else should I have? Caviar. That's what I should have, folks. Caviar. And let me tell you, from a cook's perspective here, in this next slide, you're seeing these tanks of where Siberian sturgeon were grown, harvested for caviar as well as for the meat. But let me tell you, from a cook's perspective, bananas and caviar, just keep them on separate plates, okay? They're both wonderful and delicious when sustainable. Just keep them on separate plates. So this was my sort of first foray into, you know what? Aquaculture can be a little bit more complex in its context than I have been giving it credit for. I'm going to shut a window here quickly as the street sweeper goes by. No end to the drama here. It gave me a little more context to the human aspects of aquaculture, that, wow, there's an economy behind this. There is a culture. There's an opportunity to build upon environmental opportunities. Maybe that sort of black and white, wrong, good, good, bad approach that I've been taking was a little just ineffective. And here, this guy, this engineer in this greenhouse had created dozens, 100 jobs. He created trade, and through that tunnel, which started the problem at the outset, what happened? Well, thousands of tourists came every year to see this crazy banana farm with caviar, and he opened a restaurant and a museum and geothermal heated electricity plants, and all of this stuff came out of just some innovative thinking about what we could do. And that's what aquaculture really represents to me at its best, is human ingenuity applied in sustainable ways with the purpose of enduring, sustained human communities in resilient environments. So, with that, my journeys continued. Patrick, if you could go to the next slide and just rotate through as you will, maybe 20 seconds per. Before I start talking about anything, any product or farm that I consider good, I go visit it. Or I do very in-depth interviews with the people behind it. I look at their science. And the slides that you're seeing here are evidence of this. When I went to tilapia farms down in the far south of Mexico, my trips to Norway to see salmon farming, trips that I've taken to see every aspect of the aquaculture cycle, because it is something that needs to be validated. And we'll talk later on about how you can validate that without necessarily getting on an airplane. But what I've seen in my travels is these gorgeous communities that have formed around aquaculture when done right. Science put into action to create delicious, healthy foods in ways that not only are sustainable with an environment, but potentially even in many cases are even restorative to the environment. So, with that, that's sort of me. That's a little bit of my journey. I want to say also at the outset here that our time today is we're helped with some sponsorship help from Regal Springs Tilapia, and they are a company that has long been a leader in really pushing the boundaries of what sustainable aquaculture can be. Some of those photos of me on site that you just saw were me down at Regal Springs, Mexico's facilities. So I just want to thank them for their help and support of our time in bringing you this educational session, but also just to be very clear that they're a part of this, and but I also thank them for the work that they've done to really push the whole industry forward, along with other leader companies that I'll make mention of throughout. So, Patrick, if we could flow into that first graph there of this slide shows how much wild capture fish and farmed fish there is on the planet. And if you can see that top part of the graph there, and I won't go into it in detail, don't worry, I'm not getting wonky on you, is the growth of aquaculture. The giant portion underneath that is the percentage of wild capture fisheries. And if you'll notice something there is that wild capture fisheries have remained relatively static, about 90 million metric tons for the last several decades. There is a lot of debate on whether that is a sustainable number, and I believe that that is not necessarily a sustainable number, but very close to it is. We certainly need to do more work around sustainable wild fisheries. There are great people, organizations, countries, and everybody working on it, and I very much trust that if we as consumers participate in sustaining sustainable wild capture fisheries, that they should and must be part of our food system's future. They are, in fact, one of the very oldest industries there ever was. In fact, a lot of people think that, some scientists think that because of eating seafood is really the Kickstarter of where our brains really sort of took that quantum leap in evolution and really became a thinking mammal. So seafood from wild capture is important. Nothing about aquaculture, to me, is exclusive of wild capture seafood. But that number has remained relatively static, as you can see. The amount of aquaculture production is growing exponentially, as you see there. And to me, that's a good thing, because demand for seafood globally is expected to triple by the year of 2050, at least, if not before then. That's due to just growing population. That's due to growing wealth. It is also due to just a growing reliance upon the oceans and the resources there that really cover 70+% of our planet, folks, right? So we call it planet Earth, but it's really planet ocean. And as we begin to see the boundaries of terrestrial sustainability, I think it's appropriate that we look to the oceans in sustainable ways. Part of that is aquaculture. And that growth that you see there represented on the top part of that graph is that possibility. Now, the vast majority of aquaculture happens in Asia. A huge amount of it is fresh water. So when I talk about aquaculture, folks, I am talking about many different systems, which we'll get into very briefly here. But I'm talking about lakes, ponds, streams, rivers, indoor recirc systems. I'm talking about freshwater. I'm talking about saltwater. I'm talking about a mix of the two, brackish water. Aquaculture can happen anywhere, basically, that marine life or aquatic life can happen. And so that graph there, that amount of production represents all of that in sum. Now, something to note is that we eat more fish globally than we eat beef globally. It surpassed production, aquaculture production surpassed beef production. And in fact, aquaculture production now accounts for over 50%, maybe even I think 54, 55% of the global consumption of seafood. That means that we are consuming more farmed seafood globally than we are consuming wild capture. Now, if you look at the difference there in production, that seems a little off, right? Because we're producing more wild than we are farmed. But almost 100% of what we farm goes to feed people. But about 50, 60% of what we capture in the wild goes to feed people. The rest of it goes into industrial uses. Some of it goes to feed aquaculture products. There's a whole enormous pathway by which that ends up in our economies. But suffice it to say that globally, humans eat more farmed seafood than wild, and that number and percentage is only going to grow. So, with that, how old is aquaculture? It's very, very old. It's very old. Captain Cook, when he first explored the Hawaiian Islands, found evidence there of millennia of implementation of aquaculture in various varieties. In China and other parts of Asia, we found evidence and continuous evidence of aquaculture as part of their food systems there. But as a global food system, aquaculture is only about 55 years old in terms of when the first massive, big-scale commercial pens went into the water. And that was salmon up in Norway, and then followed suit very quickly after in Washington State, as well as in Maine. And those areas, mostly salmon farming, really paved the way after centuries of small-scale aquaculture for aquaculture to become a major international commodity market. So in an industry that's only 55, 60 years old, think about what else is 55, 60 years old. The computer or the phone that you are watching me on right now, right? I mean, the computer industry is about that. Don't just think about how radically it has shifted in that amount of time. Cars were unsafe at any speed. Thank you, Ralph Nader, all the way back then, right? But industries advance. And just like those industries, computing, everything else, so has aquaculture advanced beyond the very sort of exploratory, one might even naive, I wouldn't say ignorant, but just naive. I mean, we were creating ecosystems from scratch almost. There was so much to learn, so much low-hanging fruit, low-hanging learning to be done. We've done so much of it. The industry has come so far. And that is not to say it has not been without its missteps that endure to this day. So I'll talk about some of those in order to set up some of the solutions and the methods that we'll talk about. We'll take another just sort of 10 minutes or so here, and then I'll play a video of me cooking up some tacos outside, and then we'll take some questions. So Patrick, if you would please advance to the next slide. So this slide is a graphic of a net pen. And you'll see here illustrated some of the issues that historically net pen aquaculture has faced. And I use this even though it is a very small amount of the overall aquaculture production. It is what is sort of most in the media, most talked about. And this illustrates in many ways some of those most important issues. Now, this is not a condemnation of the industry. This is merely just pointing out where the issues are in order to talk about who needs to keep getting better as well as who is doing better. So the things I'll mention here, well, escapes, just if you're growing a species in waters where it is not indigenous, where it is not native, well, if by accident those fish swim free, it can cause problems, just an introduced non-native species. So no fish farmer wants to see their fish swim free. It does happen. Yes, means are being taken to mitigate that, to prevent that. But bottom line is no cattle rancher would want to see their cattle escape and roam free and never come back, right? No broccoli farmer wants to see their broccoli fly away. No one wants to see their investment lost. So in this way, I have a faith in the industry to act in its own self-interest towards this solution, right? So feed conversion ratio, which has evolved in a number of different ways, but basically many fish are carnivores. A lot of the fish that we farm at the top level, such as salmon, are carnivores, meaning they require some fish input, right? So if we're talking about sustainable seafood, if you have to put in more seafood in the form of anchovies for the salmon to eat, if you put in this much anchovy in order to get just this much salmon, that doesn't really work out, right? No. So that was called feed conversion ratio. There's a number of different acronyms that we could get into, but it gets kind of dorky. But bottom line is, how much resource are we putting in order to get resource out? If that equation is negative, that's not sustainable. There are a lot of new technologies coming out. There's a lot of just good science about, well, figuring out exactly how much the fish really need to eat, modifying diets, including more plant-based there, but also some very exciting work around even carbon capture to create fish feed, which blows my mind, and I can't say I quite understand it, but also Companies like Veramaris and other algae producers, and just transparency, I have a financial relationship with Veramaris, but they are one of the leaders, amongst others, in creating wholesome, delicious, healthy foods out of algae that replaces fish meal. So a lot of that fish in to fish out ratio is beginning to moderate, and in some cases, as you'll see with some salmon farmers and others, that ratio is actually getting impressively high in terms of the overall equation of output. So other things, antibiotic resistance. At first we were just shoving a whole lot of fish together in one place, and well, social distancing, folks. We just learned about this, didn't we? Yeah, maybe not the greatest of circumstances, but fish too need some social distancing. You can't put too many of them in a pen before, well, it becomes just a vector for disease creation and problems. So understanding how much fish can fit in a pen and maintain their health, robustness, resilience helps to, well, just mitigate a whole lot of animal health and welfare issues, but also antibiotic. Another issue, and this is the last one I'll talk about here, is, well, fish eat, and fish, like everything else, then excrete, right? And if there's too much of that collects in one area, say directly underneath the cage, fertilizer becomes poison, the dose makes the poison, right? So some of the initiatives around that are very simple, just moving the pens, right? We do this on land, fallowing fields, allowing a meadow or a grass or plain to regenerate before we graze it again. Rotating crops, as we do in sustainable organic agriculture, right? You don't plant potatoes every single year, you plant a host of different things. We're beginning to apply that as well. So, though I talk about the positives that we are doing this, I also just want to be clear that there is some aquaculture that is still not on this level. So, again, I'm not giving a pass to the whole industry, but merely creating the context by which we can understand who are the leaders, why they are leaders, and what we can do and what we can demand of those that need to get better. All right, we're going to talk now about the common types of aquaculture. This is not every type, but it certainly gives just a brief overview, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, just because most people don't understand what a fish farm even looks like, right? We can close our eyes and picture undulating rows of corn planted on hills off into autumn splendor, setting sun, right, with the red barn paint fading. We have the white picket fence house with the, just American Gothic. Like, we get this, right? We think land beautiful for our presence. We get it. We even sing of it in our national songs, for amber waves of grain, the fruited plain. We deeply understand farming and give it social license. We credit it for the virtues it brings to our communities. But with fish farming, we often don't understand that, and thus this aspect of it. And these illustrations and this information I'm pulling directly from our online course here with Rouxbe Seafood Literacy. So please do check that out if you're interested in seeing more. Patrick, if you would, to the first slide here. So, open net pen. This is what we were just talking about there with some of the issues that face fish farming. So this is what one looks like out in the world, right? I mean, they can be really kind of beautiful, and they happen in beautiful places, oftentimes very remote. But basically, a net pen is a pen or a cage, fully enclosed or open at the top, that is anchored or buoyed, moored to, forgive me if the sound is bad because the street sweeper's going by again, moored in an area of the ocean or a lake, such as is the case with Regal Tilapia. These ecosystems they are a natural ecosystem. There's a lot of flow through water. The fish get just about as much exercise, I don't know about as much, but they get plenty of exercise because these farms are situated where the fish are swimming against the current, as they naturally always do. And so these are borrowing or utilizing existing ecosystems, but setting up these systems that are sort of create the opportunity to farm. That's what these look like. Now, Patrick, to the next slide, please. One of the really incredible solutions that's happening is what's called integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. Hey, big words there, right? What does that mean? It means growing a bunch of things together so that they all kind of act in concert. So instead of just maybe one species grown in one cage, you have that cage or net pen, inside of which you have one species, your principal species, such as salmon. Within that same cage, you might have wrasse, another species that naturally feeds on parasites or little sea lice that can infect the salmon, and so creates a natural solution. This is the same thing as putting ladybugs out in your garden to eat the aphids, right? There you go, natural solution. Around that, a curtain of hanging mussels, scallops, clams, oysters, and then around that is a secondary curtain of seaweed. All of this edible, all of it sort of feeding off the nutrient cycle that's created by this cage being there. And then underneath, a further economic crop of sea cucumbers or some sort of detrivore that, well, cleans up the bottom. And so all of a sudden you have this input of fish to feed that you feed, but then all of this around it is sort of operating within the system kind of for free, but also for it actually helps to restore and to manage the health of that ecosystem. And in some places, sometimes it even makes it better than it would have been with just the same, certainly with just that net pen there, or just if left to its own in areas where the waters are already having any issues. So integrated multi-trophic aquaculture is this really cool thing that answers for a lot of some of the sustainability concerns, but also just cool production. All right, Patrick, to the next slide, please. The next that we're showing is pond aquaculture. Pond aquaculture is sort of the same as net pen, except instead of a pen inside of a giant ecosystem, you're creating a pond in which you're growing. So this is just like taking a portion of your lawn and making a raised bed garden out of it, right? In which you grow things. The common species that are grown in this, you're going to find shrimp in various parts of the world, all over the world, really. Catfish, a number of other species, carp, tilapia, etc. Tilapia is grown both in net pens, as does Regal Springs. It's also grown in ponds. So many fish can be grown in many different ways. Now, ponds can have some negative impact on the ecosystem. They can also be mitigated for that. One of the issues around pond aquaculture, though, is that the species, and this is usually freshwater, is that the species that are grown can develop off flavors or muddy flavors if the quality of the water isn't good enough. So there are some leading groups, friends of mine like Harvest Select, American Catfish industry has really done a huge amount of work around mitigating water quality so that you end up with really great quality fish coming out of it. Shrimp producers such as those in Ecuador are really pushing boundaries on this as well. There's a lot of really great people doing great stuff. So that's pond aquaculture. Next one, Patrick. Raceways. Raceways are a really fun, kind of interesting way. It's basically just kind of creating a river. And this is a system where you divert water from a natural flow, such as a stream, river, and it goes through basically a series of locks and canals and dams in which fish are grown. Now, if you think about if you've ever seen a trout sitting in a stream, what does it do? Well, it sits there and faces upstream basically its whole life and just kind of stays there, right? Well, that's what raceways have created, is these ecosystems that mimic that. Species that are grown in such systems tend to be salmon-like species, so steelhead, such as riverence trout, does a really great job out in Idaho, Iowa, other places. So rainbow trout, brown trout, steelhead, some salmon. So really fun, interesting way, and at the end of it, the water is cleaned and then pushed back into the natural ecosystem. So it's a really low environmental impact way to grow great quality product. Some of my very favorites, longtime friends of mine, Sunburst Trout Farms right outside of Mount Pisgah State Forest down in North Carolina, do an incredible job with this, and really great high quality products as well. All right, Patrick, if you would please, to the next slide. So the next one is recirculating aquaculture systems, and these are systems that are inside, right? And what's really cool about this is this can happen anywhere. Salmon and shrimp happening from Superior Fresh and other producers in the Midwest. Shrimp in Minnesota. You've got Bronzino done by my friends at Ideal Fish down in Waterbury, Connecticut. In my home state of Maine, a lot of old abandoned paper mills are being retrofitted into salmon farms. Kingfish, Maine is coming in to grow yellowtail. Just really fun, interesting things. But this is not just rural areas, folks. We're growing tilapia right in the heart of inner cities. Think about all the dilapidated, abandoned mall infrastructure all over America. A lot of that, you put a solar panel on the roof and you put a fish farm inside of it, you've got fish farming directly in urban centers. Wow, that's really cool. And it can be done in very sustainable ways. So, Recirc aquaculture system, yeah, very, very neat. You'll see a lot of headlines and news about that these days. A lot of investment coming in on that. All right, last slide here is suspended aquaculture. Now this gets into the really, really super sustainable stuff, and this is mussels, clams, oysters, scallops, kelp, all sorts of different seaweeds. And these are the foods that actually, well, they just make the environment better than it was when we started. This is almost always done very close to shore, and so there is human impact on those ecosystems just by virtue of paved roads, human activity, etc. Higher nutrient contents such as nitrogen and phosphorus just because of our presence there in our daily lives. Oysters, clams, mussels, scallops, they uptake all of those nutrients in the form of phytoplankton, which is energy of the sun meets nutrients in the sea, and all of these little tiny plants just bloom in profusion. Plankton. Oysters, filter feeders, mussels, clams, oysters, they feed on that. So they're not taking they're taking excess nutrients out of the water or just generally feeding in ways that are completely in line with the natural ecosystem already. And in many places like the Chesapeake Bay, where the natural oyster population is at far less than, I think it's about 5% of its historical abundance, any farm-raised oyster, clam, mussel that goes into the waters there performs the very same ecosystem functions as does a wild one. So in fact, it's kind of performing that keystone role, improving the quality of that ecosystem. So in my opinion, farm-raised clams, mussels, scallops, oysters, kelp, anything else like that, I believe it's our patriotic duty to eat as many of them as we can. It's the only foods that I recommend outright overconsumption of. Because our dollars directly impact and improve the health of ecosystems, the more we eat deliciously on the half shell with a couple of splashes of hot sauce, maybe a delicious local beer from sustainable water sources. Wow, that's environmentalism on the half shell. Yeah, I'll sign up for that. I'll sign up for that every single day. So, all right, with that, again, none of these systems are perfect. All of them have room for improvement, but there are leaders at the very top of the field who are doing their very best. How do you know who is doing their best? If you see right under my picture here, there's an event document. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Over on the other side there, up in that pale beige side, the bottom one with my picture next to it says Alphabet Chowder PDF. That's an article I wrote to make sense of GAA, BAP, MSC, ASC, all the other ones. Anyway, there's a lot of great organizations out there that are doing great work to help you make decisions about what is sustainable and what is not. That alphabet chowder, as I call it, can be confusing, but that document will lay out all those organizations for you. The other thing that I would recommend in terms of how to source sustainable seafood, trust your vendors. Whether you're in the hospitality industry, every good seafood company that I know of, from Cisco to U.S. Foods, Gorton Food Service, all the way down to the small mom and pop independents, any fish company worth buying from has a good, robust sustainability policy in place. Any retailer that you consumers are buying from Publix to Walmart to the leaders such as Whole Foods Markets, Wegmans, my good friends down at HEB down in Texas, they're pushing the boundaries. What is in their stores, you can trust, and you know that they're actually going to get better. Their sustainability policies are rigorous. They are available for you to read through, and they do a lot of training around their staff to educate you about it. So there it is. That's Alphabet Chowder. And with that, I think I've talked enough. How about we get to some cooking? Patrick, if you could please cue up that taco video here. This is me cooking outside the other day. I've got some Regal Springs tilapia. Again, thank you for them for supporting our time and bringing this to you. About 6 minutes here of a really fun fish taco dish. We've got lots of questions coming up. I'll see you in about 6 minutes, and I'll be with you for about another half an hour or so. I appreciate you. Patrick, if we could roll, please. Thanks. Another really great and fun thing to do with whole fish, such as hybrid striped bass, perch, black sea bass, both wild and farmed, and these tilapia like here. So you'll notice that, hey, we're outside now because, well, pan frying whole fish is a really fun, interesting way to cook them. But it's something, there's a lot of smell involved in this, right? I mean, it's going to make your house smell like fried food, delicious fried food, but I like to do this outside. And when I serve fish tacos, yeah, fish tacos, there's just so little to them oftentimes that I like to give it a point of interest. And as such, I will saute, or not saute, I will pan fry up whole fish like this and serve them in the middle of the table on a platter for people to use tortillas and sort of reach in and grab little chunks of the fish. So all I've done is I have scored the skin of these fairly deeply, all the way down into the meat. And then I've rubbed them with a good bit of salt. And I let those sit for a while for that salt to soak into the fish. It's very key, though, that you then dry the fish very well before putting them in the oil. Now you'll see that the oil I have comes up about 1/3 of the way on the fish. That's about where you want it. You can go halfway, but it gets a little harder to manage at that point. But you want small fish that are relatively thin so that you can cook the inside quickly enough so that the outside doesn't burn. And what you'll end up seeing is that you end up with these beautiful crispy skin, sort of caramelized flesh down throughout. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit here. Keep them going. So you want to be going at about 350 degrees or so, and I bet that is probably falling down to about 315, 320 there. So I'm going to bump the heat back up. This will take a little while, but hey, it's fun. Just make sure that if you got any little kids running around, they are running around far, far away from you over there elsewhere. Deep frying or pan frying something, it's always a little bit dangerous, so just make sure that you're taking every safety precaution. Yeah, so fish tacos, other than that, what do you need for a fish taco? Well, fish taco is as fish taco does, so you do whatever you want to do on your fish tacos. What do I like to do? Well, corn tortillas. I don't like wheat tortillas. I never use them for anything ever, for any reason. Corn tortillas. There you go. Have those toasted or not. You can drop them into the oil once the fish is done. Get them a little crisp if you'd like. Use them as a garnish almost, just a couple to sprinkle over the top. But what I've got here is just a plate of some whole cloves of garlic that I smashed with a knife. I've got this is an ancho chili that I've shredded into very fine little sort of needles. I've got some fresh chili pepper, some pickled red onion. This is just a quick pickle. 2 parts vinegar, 1 part water. Got equal parts salt and sugar then. Just bring it to a simmer. Pour it over the sliced red onion. And raw radishes. And there you go. And what I'm going to do is once these fish come out, and they're just about ready here. See how beautiful and crunchy that is? Yeah, that's wonderful. How to tell if the fish is done? Well, you would just be able to flake the fish off from the bottom all the way down to the bone, and you'll see that it removes easily and that it's the same color opaque throughout. Whoop. So there we go. 2 beautiful, crispy fish. Now, these are scaled beforehand. That's very important because the scales won't necessarily cook at the same rate, or they won't cook at all. I'm going to turn the heat down. So they are scaled. But I left the fins on. Why? Because, well, for most fish, those fins become kind of nice, crunchy little garnishes. Not for everybody necessarily, but there you go. I mean, they're kind of fun, and you get to pick at them. And you know what? It's a lot less work to just leave them on than it is to try and take them off. So leave them on. There you go. So the garlic I throw in there for just a minute. To get that crisped up. I'm then going to take those dried chilies and the fresh chilies, throw them in there. Almost as soon as I get them in there, pull them out, and that dried chili, the flavor of it, the aroma of it just blooms incredibly. Becomes this wonderful, wonderful, it brings it back to life. That's all you need, just that amount of heat, no more. I'm going to turn this off. Excuse me while I do that. So you're now done with this oil. Don't move it. Don't touch it. It's not hurting anybody where it is, right? Just staying away from it and it won't hurt anybody. You start trying to move it around, that's when you start getting dangerous. So I've got this now garlic, chili, dried chili, radish mix. Well, look at that. I'm going to mix it up. Yeah, that's really yummy. It's a really yummy, beautiful little mix. So, nice texture on the garlic, the chilies. There you go. Reach in. Just grab some of that fish right off the bone, that crispy skin. Beautiful, cooked all the way through. A little bit of that garnish. There you go. That's a fish taco, as fish taco should be. Hey y'all, we're back. That was delicious. That was really fun. Man, yeah. So I cooked that the other day, and it's really tasty, I tell you. And that's a method that I had when I went down to Regal Springs down in Chiapas, down at the Tabasco region, down that way in in Mexico. One of the chefs down there, just way out in this lake. We were down in Lake Malpaso. This beautiful, giant, huge lake, and where they grow the tilapia is just this very small part of it. It's like 1 or 2%, I think, of the surface area of the lake, and just this vast ecosystem and huge amount of water flowing through it. And the taste of these fish were so incredible. Not, quite honestly, I was not a fan of tilapia until then, just from a culinary standpoint. But this product, it just shows that when it's grown well, it can be really good. And this is true of cantaloupes, folks. You've all probably had a really terrible cantaloupe before, right? And cantaloupes that are good enough to have you go back and actually keep wanting to buy cantaloupes, right? So this fish changed my mind about that. But the presentation of frying it out there with those little threads of chilies and that crisp garlic on top of the fish, lightly salted, woo! Man, it was good. Anyway, hey, cooking fish. I love it. All right, folks. Thanks for coming back and your attention. First question's up from Audio. Hi, friend. Thanks for joining me. How does fish farming and shellfish differentiate from ocean fishing? Is one way healthier to consume than the other? Does one have less mercury than the other? Okay. So ocean fishing is here fishy in various ways. We go out and act upon an ecosystem over which we have no control other than sort of the extent of our engagement with it, right? How sustainable the fishing is depends on, there's no such thing as an unsustainable fish. There's only unsustainable demand for that fish, right? There's nothing unsustainable about nature. She does what she does out there on her own thing. We insert ourselves. That's where the sustainability is. So it is us acting upon an ecosystem over which we have no control over, just except for that lever of how much engagement we have. Farming a fish is creating ecosystems from scratch, or tapping into existing ones, as with net pen, to rear fish, most often from egg all the way to harvest. So it is a completely man-made operation, operating sometimes within a natural ecosystem. So there you go. That's the difference. Is one healthier to consume than the other? No, not broadly. I don't think it's fair to say that. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of detail in there once you get down to specifics of this farm and how they produce versus others. But it's also, I think, a little bit of a false choice for us to think about one versus the other. Because at the end of the day, it's all seafood. We buy it the same. We think about it the same. We cook it the same. We serve it the same way. The culture around it at the table is the same. In restaurants and in food service, we buy it from the same people, whether it's farmed or wild. That differentiation, I think, is sort of a false narrative. Is one healthier to consume than another? No, not broadly. Is salmon healthier to consume than is cod? In some ways, yes. In some ways, moot point. It depends on what aspect of that nutrition you are looking at. If you're looking at omega-3 fatty acid content for the neurogenerative, developmental benefits from the cardiac benefits, etc., mood enhancing, stabilizing, and just the incredible benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, salmon in all of its forms, farmed or wild, has more omega-3s than does cod. Why? Just a difference in muscle structure, in the basic biology of the animal. One is sedentary, that attacks fish really quickly, and the other is a fish that swims much of its whole life and is very active and aggressive and is an active predator, hunter, rather than sort of an ambush hunter. So that all leads to just different types of flesh, right? And there you go. So to say that one is healthier than the other, no. Do fish of any variety and provenance have different nutritive qualities? Yes. So it is dependent upon what you are looking for, what is important to you in your diet. But seafood across the board is a healthy, clean, lean protein, flush with vitamins, minerals, nutrients. Much of it has a lot of omega-3s, which are essential to our diet. So there you go. Big answer to a seemingly simple question, but bottom line is, from my perspective and the perspective of many health professionals, the 3 S's of public health are: wear your seatbelt, don't smoke, and eat seafood. It's pretty darn important to us, especially the omega-3s there. So there you go. And does one have less mercury than the other? So wild fish, we have no control over. We don't control what they eat. We don't have necessarily acute control over their environment, meaning we can't change the amount of methyl mercury in this one place, or in this PCBs or whatever, in this river or delta system, whatever it is. We do have macro control in the fact that we put coal exhaust into the air, from which settles out methyl mercury and absorbs into the ocean. That's where the vast majority of it comes from. So is methyl mercury an impact of human presence? Absolutely. An activity? Yes. Do we have control over it in the wild? No. Do we have control over what a fish eats when it's in captivity? Yes, we do. So when fish pellets, fish food, the same stuff you would feed to your goldfish, in your little tank, when that is formulated, whatever it is formulated from brings with it whatever it had where it was grown. And so a lot of very good producers of aquaculture are very, very mindful of the sources of whatever products are going in, whether it's plant-based, whether it's algae-based, whether it's fish-based, marine-based, freshwater-based, whatever it is. Monitoring for environmental pollutants like methyl mercury, PCBs, dioxins, microplastics, etc. So that said, yes. But the vast majority of seafood is, in fact, not, it falls far above sort of the categories of concern as relates to methyl mercury. So the amount of methyl, excuse me, I just on my phone there, the amount of methyl mercury in a fish that needs to be present in a fish in order for it to be considered unhealthful or above the guidance levels, the vast majority of seafood is outside of that category of concern. If you look at just underneath my picture here in the event document, there is a PDF there of sources that's a list of seafoods, farmed and wild, that are best choices. I'm sorry, Patrick? I'm sorry, Patrick was just telling me it's in the references document, not in the event document there. Thank you for that. A good sort of primer on what are the best options there and which fish to avoid. So there you go. Thanks. Lots of questions in there, lots of information to respond. Thanks, Audie. I appreciate you. Diane T, we live in a lake with a lot of mercury in it. I'm sorry for that. What is a quote-unquote healthy amount of fish to consume? If you use the word a lot and mercury in the same sentence, the answer is going to be very little, if any. The key there is to go with your local regulatory agency or enforcement agency, so your Fish and Wildlife or your local disease control. They will have information about the safety of recreational fishing, and that will, around bodies of water, and that will be, of course, relevant to any commercial fishery that's in the area. So that information is very specific, even pond to pond, lake to lake even. So check out your local government resources, oftentimes Fish and Wildlife Service. Anyone that's regulating or overseeing recreational fishing is offering guidance and guidelines for that. Thanks. Great question. Appreciate it. All right, from Vivian. Hi, friend. What are the best seafood for heart patients? What has the least amount of unhealthy cholesterol? Great question. So the only fish or the only seafoods that have cholesterol in levels of concern that I've really heard about are going to be cephalopods and crustaceans, so lobster, crab, squid, shrimp. Those are the species in which cholesterol can be high. And whether it's LDL or HDL, I'm not particularly aware of that info, but those would be the ones, the sort of the categories to look at very closely. But in terms of general seafood, the benefits of the omega-3s brought to you by oily fish, such as salmon, both farmed and wild, sardines, mackerel, anchovies, herring. Basically, on my list of the most delicious fish, the fish that really taste like something, that give you the best culinary palate from which to work from. Woo-hoo-hoo! Give me some mackerel any day. I will cook it, and I will love it. Pickled herring, sardines. I mean, you talk about a sustainable, convenient lunch. It's right up there on the top shelf. Cans of sardines. Yep, I buy a lot of them. It's my son's can of smoked bristling 2-layer sardines my kid to school, oftentimes for lunch. So those are what's really great. You do have to be mindful of sodium content when you're looking at canned seafood. But again, oily fish, herring, mackerel, sardines, salmon, sablefish are really at the top of that list. But there are a huge number of fish that have a good quantity of omega-3s. Alaska, very sustainable Alaska pollock is also way up there on that list. But also just cod, tilapia, others. While they are much lower than salmon, they still have those omega-3s in there. Great for cardiac benefits, helping to reduce cardiac heart disease, cardiac mortality incidences, etc. It is very important. Thank you. Great question. Appreciate it. Thanks, Vivian. All right, from Chris E. Hi, friend. Nice to see you, and thanks for your emails. I will be responding to you. Should the consumer be concerned about buying salmon labeled color added? No. Just across the board, my answer to that is no. So farmed salmon is labeled by law color added. The reason for this gets into, well, some infighting in the seafood industry. That when farmed salmon really first came onto the market in a big way in the 1980s and threatened, as it did, wild caught salmon's sort of dominance, well, prevalence in the marketplace because it was the only one. There was some infighting about sort of that market, and a lawsuit was filed that requested that salmon be labeled, farmed salmon be labeled color added, sort of as a, an albatross to hang over its neck, because it begged people to ask questions about it, like, why does it have color added? Well, the color added to it is a naturally occurring astaxanthin carotenoid pigment that in the wild salmon get from eating krill and shrimp and things in their natural diet. Salmon is white colored. All salmon's flesh is white colored until it starts eating its normal diet, at which point it becomes pigmented. You ever seen a white flamingo? Yeah, all flamingos are white until they start eating shrimp during shrimp season, and then they turn pink. Same thing with salmon. It's part of the diet. So farmed salmon uses oftentimes, I believe mostly all the time, a lab-created or a synthetic astaxanthin carotenoid pigment that is molecularly, from what I understand, identical to wild. I have never seen any paper or any science that showcases any detrimental impact of it. I've seen some science that says it doesn't have the same antioxidative effects as does wild source carotenoids, astaxanthins. That said, that to me is not a detriment. That is not a cause for concern in any way. There is no stated detriment that I know of. So there you go. A long answer, but again, it's a very complicated ecosystem. And to understand why that color added is there in the first place, I think really makes the rest of the information make sense. It gives you that context. So there you go. So my recommendation is buy delicious salmon from sustainable sources. Every single fish that comes out of the state of Alaska it's an all-star. All of it wild, all of it. All 5 salmon species, wonderfully delicious. There are also incredible salmon producers on land, in the sea, and ponds that are doing great work. And anyone that is sustainable, as via my alphabet chowder there, I believe deserves our support and everything in its season. Okay, there you go. Thanks for your question. Hi, Hilda. Great to see you, friend. Always a pleasure. What goes into and out of fish in an aquaculture? Okay, so I explained that a little bit earlier in the feed production. So whether it's plant-based materials augmented with algae and or fish products, some fish oil or fish meal, which is the proteins made from ground down fish such as anchoveta. That is the basis of that. But the fish feeds are evolving rapidly. Companies like my colleagues Vera Morris and others who are doing the algae-based feeds that are helping to replace fish oils, even carbon capture-based feeds that, as I said earlier, I don't quite understand the technology there, but also from insects being grown to replace that. There's a lot going on there. So all of it good, and, well, the vast majority of it very good, and it's leading to really good, high-quality products, too, because in the day, it's dinner, and it's got to be delicious. Secondly, your question, would the farmed fish be fattier because of less exercise? Manipulation of our foods, less manipulation, the better. So 2 kind of thoughts there. Farmed salmon do tend to be fattier than some of the wild salmon species. Part of that is just the feed regimen. Part of that is the environment in which they're grown. Part of it is just the species of salmon that is being farmed, whether it's coho or, as is most common, the Atlantic salmon or king salmon, which are just naturally fattier fish. So a lot of this has to do with the producer, some of which has to do with the environment, etc. So I can't say one or the other, but those fats are good from a culinary perspective. They are also good from a nutrition perspective because those are the omega-3 fatty acids. In some farmed fish, you're going to get some omega-6 fatty acid component in there because of at parts of the feed, such as corn or non-GMO soy, whatever that's being used to fill. So is one healthier than the other? I can't say because there's so much nuance and detail there. Is one going to be fattier than the other? I can't say because it's all species specific and producer specific. If it's sustainable, though, it's good in my book. And I feel that to your question here or your comment, I feel the less manipulation of our foods, the better. My thoughts, I tend to agree with that. However, I also think that manipulation maybe isn't the right word there to describe the best-in-class producers who, in my opinion, are really working with nature, who are looking at natural solutions, that are looking at just smart genetics and not genetic modification, but just this is what Gregor Mendel did in the fields with his peas at his monastery that sort of fostered modern agriculture in the ways that, if you pick up a Burpee catalog or a Fedco or a Johnny Seeds, all of those plants have been selected, right, for qualities and characteristics. We don't find that objective in agriculture necessarily when it's done just in the field and done just through selection, right? A lot of that's happening in aquaculture as well, that it's such a young industry that we're just diving into all these incredible opportunities. So I don't feel that manipulation is the right word. I think it's looking at integrative opportunities the very best producers are doing. Okay? Hey, Hilda, you always ask wonderful questions, and you're such a wonderful supporter and guest of ours. So thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you. All right. From Jim C. I've seen a few experts, quote unquote, your quotes, that are very negative on some quote unquote farm seafood. Could you share your knowledge on farm seafood quality, safety, nutrition, etc.? So, Jim, I've gone through a whole lot of that over the last hour, so I don't want to rehash that too much, but I will say that, again, I think it's sort of a false choice when it comes to choosing between sustainable wild fisheries and sustainable farm seafood. It's all the same in my mind, which is that it's an essential part of our diet now for healthy people. It's an essential part of our environment, our economies, and our public health moving forward. And I just think it's something that we as a group of consumers need to have discussions just like this to understand and consider the context of our choices, and I hope I've offered much of that for you today. Thanks. Frank, hey, a culinary question. How do you score fish before you cook it? Very sharp knife. That's the key right there. So the fish should also be scaled. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but you were scoring the skin. And scoring means a very, very shallow gash just to break up some of that tendon, the connective tissue. And the reasons for this are multiple. Part of it is to expose just a little bit of flesh for marinade and or seasoning and or smoked heat source such as smoke to penetrate, to flavor the culinary aspects of the fish. The other aspect would be, say, with mackerel or snapper, striped bass, where as soon as you put that fish skin down in a pan, what does it do? It curls up, right? So you have a little bit of the fish skin connected to the pan and a lot of it sort of spooned up. Well, scoring helps to relieve some of that muscular tension, and so the fish will sit flatter in the pan and thus crisp and caramelized crust evenly. Those are the reasons for it, but you want to use a very, very sharp knife. I like a smaller knife for this, and you want to use the whole of the knife. I don't like to just sort of saw at it from the tip, but put the knife, sort of the very broad side of the knife down, and just draw through. You're not putting pressure down, letting the slice do the work. And in that way, you're maintaining just that surface cut, so you're not going too deep. And the reason for not going too deep is that, well, you just exposed more of that flesh, moisture loss, etc. You just want a little bit. There you go. All right, Pilar. Hey, Pilar. Nice to see you. We were conversing about aquaculture. I'm glad you joined us for this 101 course. And I really appreciate all of your comments about generations of fishing community in your family and understanding the impacts there. So Pilar and I had a nice conversation about this, and it brings me to a point that I meant to mention earlier, that farmed seafood is a new culture. And just because the farming of seafood sort of broadly considered is sustainable, broadly considered has all these opportunities, does not mean that all forms or even any form of farmed seafood belongs in your community, in your waters. At your market, yes, it deserves to be there because there are people in your community that need to make decisions based on a range of factors. It should be sold everywhere. Should it be in your local waters? Those are questions for communities to decide. If you're in Alaska, where the state itself, the land itself, is built upon eons of salmon swimming, of those nutrients being planted, the trees themselves, the bears, the eagles, the grass, everything of the state of Alaska is built on salmon. Wild salmon. I get it that up there, this culture of transcommunication, that salmon and people and bears and trees are one. Okay, yeah, absolutely. I get it that maybe farmed salmon doesn't belong there. But to say then that farmed salmon doesn't belong in my state of Maine, where it is very much part of a culture and accepted here, these are dialogues to be had at a local and community level. On the macro level, aquaculture matters, and it must be a part of our food system. It just doesn't have to be a part of your daily life or your community. That's for you to decide. So with that sort of bit of respect out of the way there, based on Pilar and our conversations together, your question, what is the best farmed salmon and fish? What are your thoughts on genetically modified engineered salmon and fish? Woo, okay, diving deep. I'm not going to say the best farmed salmon. There are just incredible producers that are pushing boundaries in many different ways. Some of them Superior Fresh. Up in the Midwest, you have Quarry Arctic, my dear friend Jen Bushman, who is leading in charge there on a third generation family-owned Norwegian farm. Just some really interesting people doing really interesting things. But look at that alphabet chowder link that I've got there. Look into some of those links, and you'll see that there are best aquaculture. There are certified 4-star salmons. You look at Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program, and there's a number of individual producers that are, there's a couple at least, green listed. Anything coming from recirculating systems is green listed by them, meaning great choice. So there's a host of leaders. Of course, all leaders have leaders themselves, but that's my sort of advice on that. But also, farm salmon is such a broad and diverse category. You're sort of saying, what's the best Pinot Noir? Like, well, there's a lot there, right? Whether you're talking Sonoma or Napa or Burgundy or Argentina, I mean, you're going to get very different products. Same thing with farm salmon. There are just very different culinary products underneath that umbrella. So I think that's up for you to decide and explore, because it really is kind of fun. And I recommend also trying it next to wild salmons. You know, get some great frozen quality fresh frozen fish from Alaska and try it. You know what? I mean, it's like a wine tasting, but a salmon tasting. Find your favorites. Cool. All right, what are my thoughts on genetically engineered fish? So I wrote, and Pilar, I believe I shared with you, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times on this several years back now, I guess 5 years back. My take on this very quickly is that I am not inherently anti-genetic modification. I think that there is a lot to be explored there. I do believe in a precautionary principle, meaning just because we have technology doesn't mean we should do it, right? But because we maybe shouldn't just do it because we have the technology doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about the technology. There's a scale here, and I don't think that we have gotten to a point where we have fully weighed out the science there. There's very compelling science on both ends, and I am not trying to start a very heated debate here because people are very passionate about this, and I understand those passions. But that said, given that I can't really comment on should GMOs exist or not, should GMO salmon, where are we on that? My thought is that I haven't been convinced that we need it. I'm not anti-GMO farmed salmon. I'm just saying that a lot of the benefits that I've seen come from that. I've seen advancement towards in conventional farming and genetic selection that I was talking about earlier, not modification. So, do I support the science that's going on there? Yes. I think that in a world where we ask, why is a single person hungry? The answer is always political and our lack of will to feed that person. So let's blame it on ourselves first. But in a world in which we are coming up against practical boundaries of sustainability, of what this earth can provide for us, we have to be asking ourselves questions of technology and appropriate implementation. So that's where I am on GMO farmed salmon. Complicated take. I'm sorry I can't just give you a yay, nay, but it's something I appreciate you asking after, and it's something that I hope all of us will at least approach with an open mind. You can approach it with opinion, of course, but let's always pay attention to good science and both sides of the dialogue. All right. Hey, Kojo, Courtney J. How are you, friend? I owe you an email. I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. It's been crazy. What are your thoughts about the latest news on Subway and no DNA findings of tuna in sandwiches? Yes, okay. So the background on this, Courtney is talking about, who, by the way, is one of the most amazing cooks I've seen on Instagram. I don't know if you want to share your Instagram there, but I really enjoy it. There's nothing she does that isn't just like, hot damn, better than I could do. There's your props, lady, because you deserve it. Okay, my thoughts on Subway salmon. There was a lawsuit filed that claimed that Subway does not put tuna, it's 100% devoid of tuna in their tuna sandwich. That lawsuit has now been amended by the plaintiffs to say that it does not include sustainable tuna. So the scope of the lawsuit is changed radically. I tend not to trust lawsuits like this. I can't say that. This lawsuit has, I think, a long shadow of sustainability and vegan activism behind it, which is a good thing, but at the expense of the good name of a company that may or may not deserve this. So the New York Times recently did, I think just last week, did a really great article on this, sort of a denouement, if you will, sort of an unpacking of this, in which they sent off samples to a lab. They write all about how the lab was actually very difficult to find one that was willing to work with them, but then also about the science of trying to identify likely twice cooked seafood, because a lot of that genetic structure is and coding has been destroyed in the cooking process, and so those DNA signatures are very hard to find, from what I understand. And tuna is cooked once, sort of on the bone, and then it's picked off, and then added to the can. Water or oil, whatever, is added. The can is then closed, and then it's cooked in a retort machine for another 2 or 3 hours, I think, to bring it up to safety temperatures. So tuna is just from a science standpoint, trying to find that DNA is a long shot. Whether it's tuna or not, trying to find anything is a long shot at that point, especially because it's also a very nondescript texture, appearance, etc. So this is all to say, Courtney, that I don't put a lot of weight in the fact that, oh, they didn't find the tuna DNA in there. It's like, well, yeah, it would have been kind of miraculous had they, is what I understand from it. So where are we left with on this? The plaintiff's word in this lawsuit versus Subway's word in defense of it in the media marketplace, where really what's at stake here is the good name of the company and sort of this the purpose of starting this larger dialogue about what is sustainable and what's not. I will say that if it's not tuna, what is it? And I can't think of any economics in which faking the tuna makes any sense economically. It would be so much more expensive for it to be, I think, just about anything else than tuna. So, I mean, it kind of boggles my mind. It seems like this is far more of a media play than it is actually about fact on the ground in what they're serving. So, hey, Courtney, complicated answer. Good to see you, friend. Thank you. Oh, my phone is about to die, even though Patrick asked me, helpfully, at the beginning of this, if I had plugged in. I did, but I didn't actually plug it into the wall. There you go. That's where I am today. All right, so we're coming up on end of time here. I've got a couple other questions here, and I'll try and race through and give shorter answers. I appreciate you sticking around with me. From Jill B, what fish from southern waters, i.e. Gulf of Mexico, is healthy? So in the references document, just below my picture there in the window, you'll see that document around healthy choices. A lot of those methyl mercury content, as well as the vast number of fish without them. There are a number of southern water species listed in there. As well, go to the Seafood Nutrition Partnership, SNP. Some very dear friends who are doing really groundbreaking, I think, heroic moral work around seafood consumption and increasing that within communities here. Seafood Nutrition Partnership just has great information about what are the healthy fish and sort of cross-referencing that against species in your area. It's a great way to do it. So there you go. All right, Robert, I heard that fish with a cloudy eye versus clear eye can affect the taste of the fish. Is this due to being an old fish? Yes. There you go. When determining the quality of a whole fish, looking at the eyes, looking at the gills, looking at the scales, just the overall quality of the fish are the very initial determinants of quality. I'd say 95% of the time, a cloudy eye represents a lack of freshness and just deterioration or poor handling. In very few cases, that is actually not a reference point for the quality, but I would just say, if you're looking at a fish with an eye, you're looking at a whole fish, right? So look at the scales. Are they unbroken? Are they firmly attached? Is the fish generally moist? Or is it dried out and baked, just kind of unhealthy looking? Are the gills, if you pull the flap back, is it, do they look moist and intact? You don't want to see anything that you wouldn't want to see, right? Slime, whatever else. Are the fins intact? Does it look, is it cold, etc.? Just does it look like somebody cared for it? The eye tells you that, yes, but there's a lot of other features along with it. So don't ever just use one quality characteristic to determine. There you go. Thanks, Robert. Great question. From Pilar A. Another question on nuclear waste affecting fish and what wild fish and where from should we not eat? Okay, so really speaking here about the Fukushima nuclear disaster that was so tragic in Japan, and recent decision throughout the years, I think, to release a lot of that, some of the water that was retented during that sort of addressing that crisis. I don't know about that. I will say that in the immediate aftermath of that, when Facebook, that great arbiter and source of 100% always accurate information, if you can't tell, I'm being very sarcastic, really, I saw lots of graphs and pretty pictures that showed all sorts of wildlife in very life-compromising circumstances, and graphs that showed the flows of radiation across the sea, and those, I never saw one that was true. Most of those charts and maps were actually water temperature and currents that could be found on maps with the National Oceanographic Agency here, administration. The reports of mass die-offs of fish on the Pacific coast of this country were not I never saw any science relating that to radiation, and the type of radiation that was released from that, and I don't remember it, but it was like it was uranium-137 and strontium-238. Very specific types of radiation that were released. And in testing for those, I've never heard of anybody finding that in any levels other than natural background levels. So again, complicated answer, all to say that there's a lot of false information out there about this. I haven't seen any information that really says there's any immediate detriment. Know the source of your seafood. If you are concerned about it, just commit to say, okay, I'm going to buy domestic species or species that are imported from countries such as Norway or Chile, where these things are monitored regularly. So there you go, Pilar. Good question. Again, sort of opening up a Pandora's box of worms, if you will, for fish. That was funny. Maybe not. Okay. Hi, Lisa, friend. Bit off topic. Interesting how you might prepare. Oh no! Wow. Would you sashimi or pansy? Or what type of sauce or salsa might you suggest? So, ono, as is known in Hawaiian, or wahoo, member of the tuna family. It has a bright, brilliant white flesh to it, bullet-like shape. Very fast, mean, lean creatures, but still have a lot of fat to them. They have that same concentric ring of flesh that tuna does. They're a lot leaner, though, than many tunas are, and so fully cooking them, I think, can tend to dry them out. Much like tunas on the grill, you don't really want to fully cook them. You leave them, I think, up to medium is about the highest that I would cook them, unless you are doing a confit, cooking in oil, with flavorful herbs and garlic over a long period of time to really infuse those flavors. Woo! Yeah, there you go. Cool it down, make an aioli out of some of that oil. Yeah, get all Mediterranean with it. Yes, yes, yes. Mix some lemon juice in it. There you go. That said, searing, a nice spice rub. I like just black pepper, fennel seed, and allspice, a mixture that I keep in equal parts in my pepper grinder, just on hand at all times. That's what I use, is black pepper. Roll that in a pan, super hot, just a scant bit of oil to get a nice crust on the outside. Leave it, cold, rare on the inside. But also poaching it in a very flavorful broth. Lots of white wine, lots of acidity, some strong herbs, maybe something like rosemary, thyme, even sage. Let it cool down. Cook it just barely, maybe just a few minutes, and then pull it off the heat. Let it cool down. Never let it get above 165 degrees. Let it cool down in that liquid so that it helps to absorb those flavors. Chill it overnight, and then take it out. Flake it. Mix a little bit of that poaching liquid with some whole grain mustard, a little bit of lemon juice, a nice neutral flavored olive oil, something like that, or a nut oil, like a little bit of pistachio and some vegetable oil, etc. Make a vinaigrette, toss the fish in that, put it over a salad. Woo-wee. There you go. I'm in love. I'd eat that. Hey, thanks for your question. I appreciate it. Nice to bring up wahoo and ono. Fun. All right, from Gabriella. Chef, my personal taste, seafood from the Gulf of Mexico, better taste than the Pacific Ocean. What does it consist of? Wow. Okay, so you're asking me to go way, way deep dorky. And I don't have, we don't really have time for that. I'll be right back, though. I'm going to do, not shameless self-promotion because, well, it answers exactly what you're for, but one of my most recent books, The American Seafood, it's what I consider the owner's manual of seafood in America. It's a culinary and anthropological sketch of every single species landed in the United States. Huge sort of cultural tome. But in the front matter here, I have a lot about the anatomy of a fish, the flavor of fish, that goes into detail about the science of temperature of water, what they eat, from freshwater to saltwater, how that changes physiology and water intake, etc. There's a lot there, but suffice to say, the generalities of this is that waters taste different because of different nutrient loads and different microflora that live there. So different plankton live in the Pacific Ocean. There's a lot of crossover, but different plankton live there than live here, and different plankton live in the Gulf of Mexico than they do up in the Northwest Atlantic. same ocean. So just think about a forest in your part of the woods versus the Pacific Northwest versus here in Maine. They're going to have all different plants. Same thing as the ocean. And when fish flavor profile is built upon the filter feeders, sardines, anchovies, little things that filter the water to eat that plankton that are then eaten by the mackerel. The mackerel are then eaten by the herring are then eaten by the snapper are eaten by the tuna, whatever it is, all the way on up. Those flavors amplify and magnify, so the base of it is down here. Sort of, you are what you eat. Well, so are fish. Farmed fish, they are what they eat. Wild fish are too. So that's the difference in flavor. But please check out that book. And any of you still on, please, hey, Sustain the Sustainers, check out that book if you're interested in seafood. That is, well, almost much of what you would need to know. Hey, I really appreciate it. Question. John B. No question, just want to let you know I'm glad you're covering aquaculture. Oh, well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. Nice way to send off. Thank you. And Pilar, the same. Thank you for doing this. Love it. Grateful. Hey, Pilar, I'm grateful for you. John, grateful for you. To all of you who joined today, any of you who join us in the future, thanks. I really appreciate your interest in this topic. I appreciate your interest in feeding people, because as I said at the start, feeding people is an act of love, an act of generosity, gracious hospitality. The world needs more of it, so keep doing it. Bon appetit. I've got 2 more recipe videos that we're just going to play at the end of this, so stick around, check those out. It's for a ceviche, as well as for a broiled tilapia dish using the Regal Springs with an avocado, chili, and orange olive oil salsa on top. Kind of sexy, kind of delicious. Anyway, stick around, check those out. I will not be here with you at the end of it, but I appreciate you. Follow me on Instagram at Barton Seaver. If you can, ever I can do anything, reach out to me, barton@ruby.com. Check out my books. Join us on these Thursday events here. I wish you all well. Again, I wish to thank Regal Springs Tilapia for their support in us, helping us to bring this vast educational session to you. Bon appetit. Be well, y'all. Hey, y'all. Okay, another dish that really works. One of the great things about aquaculture is that you know the quality of the fish, especially when the quality of the waters it's coming from and whether or not there's parasites in it. So it makes it a great opportunity for serving raw. It's still, you need to follow your local health guidelines according to whatever they say there. So please check into that. But the dish that I really love to do, it's a version of a ceviche. And I was really amazed. I went down to Mexico, down in the Tabasco region. I visited the Regal Springs farm there. And one of the dishes that I was served while down there was a ceviche. And it blew my mind how effective tilapia was as a ceviche fish. So the dish that I like to do, though, is non-traditional to ceviche. It involves flavors from, well, all over. And I like to add nuts to it. So I've got some slivered almonds. I like to add a sweet component. I've got some raisins. You could use currants, golden raisins, whatever. And I soak those in lime juice ahead of time to sort of plump them up, rehydrate them. So they're these sweet, sour bombs, if you will. Let's see. Lime juice, of course, is the acid of choice that I use. And then I like red onions that have been sliced very, very thin and then washed under cold water. And that just takes away some of that bitterness to them, some of that sulfurous bite, but leaves that sweetness, but also some of that sort of spice of them. One thing I also really like to do is to aromatize a ceviche. And in order to do that, like I don't want garlic in the ceviche, I don't want ginger in the ceviche, but I do want just a little bit of the flavor in there, some of the aroma. So I use maybe just a little piece of cut ginger here, just sliced in half, and I just kind of scent the bowl with this. This is a technique sometimes used with garlic for salad dressings. Sort of crush the garlic clove and rub the inside of the bowl just to give just a hint of that garlic oil to it. I do the same thing here. So just a hint of that ginger richness. So I will salt the fish and then use the lime juice. Now with this one, I will put all of the components except the onion and the herbs, which will go in at the very end. But the raisins, the almonds, which will sort of somewhat rehydrate, just put all that in there and let it sit for about 20 minutes. Now the rule of thumb for ceviche is, well, really it's up to you. I like about 20 minutes for a piece of fish that is diced about that size, fingernail size or so, right? That's what I want, like nice bite-sized piece. So toss that together and let it sit under refrigeration for about 20 minutes. So I'm gonna go over here, I'm gonna stay on camera maybe, and grab some tarragon, because I forgot it over there. This will be the last component of the dish. You can use mint, is one that I really, really love. Any of you who've joined me before know that I love me some mint, putting it in everything. I even sing about mint, I love it so much. Anyway, rough chop the herbs. This is not a super fancy ceviche to it, so I'm just gonna go ahead and finish out the dish here. I would, again, let this sit for about 20 minutes. The amount of onions that you use, think about what the purpose of the onion is in this dish. Color contrast, texture contrast, a little bit of spice, and sort of that earthiness of the onion. So I like to add a lot of onion. Also because my wife is not gonna eat this. My wife doesn't eat raw onions. So this is for me. Anyway, there is the ceviche all mixed together, and I'm gonna grab a, you know that term mise en place, having all your stuff in order before you start cooking? Can you tell I didn't have everything in order before I started cooking this? So yeah, there you go. Anyway, I would also urge you to use a spoon maybe, but hey, welcome to my kitchen. I'd love to have you over. Come eat dinner. So there's your ceviche. I'll finish that out with just a little bit of olive oil. Again, these are non-traditional flavors, but that fish tenses up. It sort of, quote unquote, cooks in the acid of the lime juice, marries well with that beautiful plump raisin, that sweet sour bombs there, the texture of the onion and the almond, the tarragon or the mint, whatever you choose to use in there. That's a very refreshing, bright, light dish. Cheers. One of my favorite attributes about tilapia is that its clean, lean flavor provides an incredible canvas for just about any flavor. And well, there's few fish that I think are better suited to just rampaging through your spice cabinet, pulling out whatever you want. So the fish broils up really quickly and easily. I like to add some fat to it when I broil it because it is very lean fish. So just a little bit of oil to it or a little bit of butter on top really helps to protect and sort of preserve that moisture that's in it. So the flavors that I use on this, well, I've got a mixture of just salt, cumin, and coriander, two flavors that I really like together, but blackening spice, Cajun spice, onion powder, Old Bay, whatever you want, whatever tastes great to you, throw it on there. About 6-7 minutes in the toaster oven. And what you end up with is this sort of exudation, some of the liquid that comes out of it, and also the oil, which is now nicely flavored. So I will use that as part of the sauce. Now the sauce that I like with this, tilapia needs some richness added to it, I think, to really broaden the flavor of the dish, but also some acidity. So this wonderful salad slash salsa slash side dish that I like to do is avocados, perfectly ripe. You want them with some texture. You don't want them to fall apart fully. Very thinly shaved chilies. So here I've got jalapeno and Fresno chilies, and then orange segments. Mix that all together. The orange juice itself becomes sort of the vinegar or the acid in this. Add some more olive oil and salt. And there you go. You have this wonderful, healthy, nutritious, delicious, colorful, beautiful side dish. Serve it as a salsa on top, and you can see it sort of pools around this wonderful vinaigrette. Serve it over rice, polenta, whatever you want. I think my chickens are pretty interested in it. They seem to be squawking after it quite a bit. Anyway, it's all for me because delicious. But this is a great salsa slash salad to go with just about any white fish that you can think of, as it really helps to accentuate those more nuanced flavors of whitefish. And yeah, hey, there you go.